Hey folks, Steve here with another Fatal Alliances The Great War guidance video for setup. This is part 3 and probably the last part, covering the setup of the game 1914 scenario. Managed to find some time to do another video today when I finished up part 2 a little earlier this afternoon. Um, at the end of the part 2 video of this mini series, I had shown how to set up the Commonwealth convoys and the general setups for Japan, Russia, and the Commonwealth itself. Hopefully, folks understand now the way the production and resources and factories all sort of work together and what you need to do to set them up. This video I'm going to be covering the setup for France and Germany, and sort of as a final thing, Serbia as the last setup, even though that technically would not happen until the game gets underway. So we'll go ahead and go through that. I did, before this video, set up all the powers that I'm going to talk about today, so rather than you watch me drag around the counters, I'm going to show the setup that I've already put together, talk a little bit about why I set them up the way that I did, and then we'll go from there. So after the Commonwealth, when you're doing setup, the next major power is France, and France is relatively straightforward, mostly because while they do have some holdings around the world, they simply do not have enough units to cover everything, and they need pretty much every man, every counter um, on the Western Front, because things are going to get hot and heavy there very quickly. They have a number of units that start on the production circle. Uh, so, at the outset of the war, it feels like they don't have enough units to do anything. They'll get some quick splotches of new units, and then they'll be okay, assuming they can survive a couple of major offenses that I imagine are going to happen, offensives that are going to happen in the early game. They have a navy that, for this setup, I chose to have set up in Marseille, and I split the stack just for ease of use, even though technically you could put some ships in Toulon and Marseille. Um, I just put them down here. I think the channel is safe enough from the UK and obviously the North Sea being covered by this massive fleet at Scapa Flow, so the French can afford to use their navy in the Mediterranean and perhaps offset the decent-sized Austrian navy stationed in Trieste. So I've set them up here. Nothing too crazy. For their convoys, now here's the thing. They have, in terms of global resources, they have some resources in French Indochina. They've got some holdings out amongst a couple different places, like this resource out here. But the thing is, they don't have enough convoys to actually make use of them. They only start the game with 7 convoy points. And, that's not going to get you very far. And I've used up some of them. One, they have a resource here in Senegal at Dakar. And so I've set up the convoys 1, 1, and 1 to get to French ports. And then there is a resource here in Algeria that I've set up a convoy for there. They end up with 3 left over at that point. I couldn't really find an easy resource to grab with only 3 convoy points, so I put them in Marseille with the idea that if convoys get destroyed, these guys can help fill in the gaps. You might have your own strategy on how you want to deal with that, and by all means, do that. They do start with an an infantry in Algeria, which I've placed in Algiers. I've also elected to put the transport ship that France starts with. I'm putting it in Algiers. I'm just setting it aside for ease of stacking. with the idea that as soon as the outbreak of the war happens, I'm going to want to transport this infantry to the main home country so it can help the main fight. So it has to, one infantry has to be in Algeria, but you can easily transport it and get it up here with the rest of the crew. Um, Finally, the main set of France's forces, again, they don't start with a huge amount. Have set up in a kind of typical fashion. I'm definitely defending what I can here in the Verdun sort of region. I've put some of the garrison units in the mountain. I've put these units here, just knowing because they could be attacked from 3 different directions. Um, no matter how Germany sets up, and I already did the Germany setup here, just ignore that for now. No matter what, this hex is in danger because it can be attacked from 3 hexes in Germany, so I wanted to make sure I gave it some strength. And then I put the fort here because there's a resource to defend, and because ultimately the Germans are probably going to be in Belgium, and then they could potentially attack this hex from 3 different sides as well, and I want to make sure that I have something to help hold it. Otherwise, the rest of this line is actually kind of thin. I don't have a huge amount of forces here, just enough to kind of hold a rough line. And we've got our headquarters unit, Joffre, here so that his range can extend to most of the French border areas, and our land bomber observation plane able to cover most of the front. I did leave Calais open because that's where the Commonwealth unit, French and his corps, are going to end up here to form up the line. If I put a French unit here, that's going to cause stacking issues, and then the British are going to end up back here or something, and they're better served in the front line. So my expectation is the Germans wouldn't be able to get right into Calais in the first impulse, and I can get the British in here, and then we've got a nice base to try to defend against. Again, kind of thin, but as the turns go on, they'll get reinforced and should be able to hold the Germans back, ideally. At least that's the best you can hope for as France in this game. Hope to stop them, and then you can worry about what comes next. So that's it for France. Not much to talk about, and it's pretty straightforward. You might maybe beef up the left flank than the right flank. I put my artillery down here with the idea that I could force pressure on the south where maybe the Germans wouldn't be expecting it. Again, if you're setting up as France in the right order, Germany has not set up yet, so you don't know what Germany's going to do. Pretend like none of these gray units are there. What can France do? You kind of have to pick, and you know that the German player is going to get to react to how you set up. So, you don't have that many options to play with, unfortunately. You got to do what you can, and this is about as good as it can go for the beginning. And again, like all countries, there are reserves that can come in and help fill up the stacking limits and make sure that you've got enough to hold the line. Okay, so then now we finally get to the big guy, Germany. And Germany kind of has an interesting position in this game. Obviously, Germany, the person who gets to play Germany in the game is going to feel really in control of the tempo of the game at the beginning, mostly because they have the most initiative. They're making the big decisions at the outset of the game, and where they decide to set up their units and where they tend to focus on is going to drive a lot of the rhythm of the game, at least for the first so many turns. This is because Germany sets up last, and because the other factions can't react to their setup until play starts, and then they can slowly move units around. Germany can set up in unexpected ways, or set up in a way that again can't really be immediately reacted to. And because of the way the setup chart goes, I mean, there's some obvious things that are on the production chart. There are some things that are set up across the world, like a few ships in Tsingtao, and then uh, the units in Tanzania, and then I think there's a couple of Southwest Africa units. Those are a given. You set those up. That's just the way it is. But when it comes to the Europe setup or the Germany setup, you have a lot of leeway because over here's Germany, over here's Germany, and you can have a sliding scale of do you want to set up heavy in the west for the Western Front, or do you set up heavy in the Eastern Front? Um, it's your choice as the German player, and you've got to think about how do you think the first couple of turns are going to go? Where do you want to keep your forces strong? Where do you want to maneuver them and operate on that? So I've set up sort of I'll call this a West Front focused setup. I've got all along the border with France and Belgium pretty strong forces. I've got oops, I'm breaking stacking limits. I need to move one of these guys out of there. Silly Steve being a cheater. Let's see, where can this guy go? I'll put him over here maybe. So what I've got set up is a stack. I have a mountain unit hoping that I'll eventually get into this mountain space and be able to hold it with some artillery to soften up the enemy. I've got another stack with artillery, a few garrison units with artillery, and I've set up my own fortifications here just so that France can't smash through and take this factory and resource objective hex, kind of an important hex. Don't want to lose that, so I beefed it up. Alternatively, I could have put that fort maybe over here near Königsberg. I've done that in the past in games. It's probably a good idea either way. Just depends on what you think is going to happen. And then I've got a similar setup here. I've got units with an engineer for crossing the river. And then up here, I have my two headquarters on the west. I have Moltke here, and then I have underneath this plain Bülow. Kind of an ahistorical setup, I think. But the idea being I've got two headquarters units that can help drive the push into Belgium and France with a plane and the balloon to kind of help with observation getting through here. And I've set up these top two stacks to be cavalry everything, cavalry corps and cavalry divisions. Same thing with here. And the reason why I'm doing that, while I'm giving up the powerful artillery strikes that are going to help me push down here maybe, I want the ability to advance without flipping up here so I can cross the length of Belgium as fast as possible as long as I'm successful in my combats so that these guys can very quickly get to where they need to be. And because I'm putting all of the units in the stack as cavalry, it will mean that everything in that stack can advance without flipping. I'm not sort of at the mercy of, oh, I advanced, but my artillery got left behind. These guys can all push forward and take these cities, factories, and resources and really put the pressure on France. So that's, more or less as good as I can set it up over here. There's only so many hexes, and I've got pretty strong start, I would think. Then in the east, I'm trying to be careful because I know I'm going to come under pressure from the Russians, right? I'm setting up last. I can see how Russia's set up. I can see they're probably going to push for Königsberg. So I just give up these two hexes because I'm not going to be able to hold this hex. It's going to be attacked by 4 different directions, so no use. I pull a strong guard corps with artillery in my balloon here. I've got Ruprecht to sort of project command into the next few hexes to help out. And then I'm trying to fortify over here, but I don't have that many counters, right? So it's kind of thinner. I'm thinned out over here with the idea that um, maybe like historically I can smash into France and Belgium, then maybe send some guys over here later, or rely on my copious amounts of reserves to help fill up the defense over here. Um, and again, I've got some guys right on the border of Poland. They're probably going to be just enough to get in and hold this area, hopefully. Though I can see some danger between these guys maybe attacking here. Um, it's going to be touch and go, probably. Um, in terms of Navy stuff, well, we do have this Zeppelin here, which I've put sort of centrally located. It's got a range of 9, so it can kind of head out in a lot of different directions pretty far. And I can maybe even try to hit London with this thing, so I'll keep it there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yep, in range of London. Um, the convoys. So Germany gets a resource from Norway. I set up the convoy for it. It's pretty exposed. And then Sweden also can provide convoys, so I put them over here in the Baltic, and I've made sure to allot a small fleet of ships with a transport here in Danzig, so that these ships can protect these convoys at the beginning of the game. I'll get the ships out and defend these convoys from the Russian ships that are in St. Petersburg. And then the transports I'm putting here as a threat to Russia. Basically, if I have a preponderance of force to spend and I think I can do it, maybe I get Finland partisans or something and they manage to snag a port. I'm going to transport some German units up to Finland, and all of a sudden, Russia is worried about St. Petersburg in a way they didn't think they were going to need to be. Just a threat. Probably won't be able to execute on it, but do what I can. Then the remainder of the convoys, which don't really have anywhere to go, and there's no point in putting them out anywhere, because they're just going to get blown up pretty easily, at least to start. I'm just putting them in Kiel, which, I'm running out of reasonable space here, so they're just sitting in Denmark, but doesn't matter for now. And then the rest of the German fleet is in Kiel, chilling, with an amphibious naval unit here acting as sort of a threat to maybe try to get into UK at some point. Probably won't be able to do it, but the amphibious landing craft is there to help me get units in if the opportunity arises. That's the best I can ask for at this point in the game. So yeah, this is a pretty standard opener, I think, for me anyway. West first, go the historical route, invade Belgium. Something to point out here, Belgium does not get set up, and part of the reason why that is because it only gets set up when it becomes activated, and becomes activated when Germany might declare war on it, for instance. But while declaration of war on Serbia is mandated at the beginning of the game, Germany invading Belgium is not. Germany can actually elect not to invade Belgium at the beginning of the game, and they might do that because they're pursuing an East first strategy, and they don't want to declare war on Belgium. They don't want to get the heat of the political world stage from invading Belgium, so they might not even do it. So there's no reason to set anything up. There's nothing here. The Allies might declare war on Belgium or something, but then you would get to set up their Belgian forces for the Central Powers. You don't have to declare war. And actually, just to kind of show, because it's a strategy of the German player that gets to decide what they're going to do, you can throw off your opponents. The very first time I played this game, it was an in-person game, and I was playing Russia, and I thought we were going to just have a good old historical game. He'd set up in the West, the German player, and do the thing. Well, much to my surprise, we had the game set up, and he set up, and next thing I knew, the entire German army was on the Eastern Front, and I ended up getting pummeled And I can't speak to the merits of an East first strategy or whether or not it's really a good one, or if it, what are the pros and cons. I won't get into that now. Um, but because Germany can set up last, you can choose that, right? Ignore Belgium, go east. And in fact, I actually have a save that I'm going to load up uh, where I set up differently. So here I did set up a east first setup. So how this compares is I put a few token German corps along the border with Belgium, mostly because I'm not going to invade Belgium. And if the Allies invade Belgium themselves, the Belgian units will help hold a line, and these guys can come and fill in some gaps. But without the entire, Western Germany being exposed to this, I still set up strong here in the southwest area. I still fortify down here. I've got my units set up strong here, mostly because I don't want to lose ground here. I don't want them to punch through these 3 hexes and get into the homeland. So I'll set up as strong as I can and then hope that this doesn't become an issue and the Allies hesitate dealing with Belgium. On the opposite side, and I'll also point out, I don't have any HQ units here. None. I don't intend to use HQ units over there for the time being. They can all get supply easily, and they won't be doing any attacks. They'll be defending, digging in. Here, I've set up very differently. I've got now, I still have my same naval setup that I had before, but instead now I've got a stronger setup of my artillery units. All the major hexes that I have in mind are pretty well and strong. I've got a unit here with artillery and engineers to eventually worry about this river here. I've got my cavalry set up to punch through in the loads. Same thing down here. I've got my best artillery, the Big Bertha, 420 millimeter cannon, ready to smash through into here. And I've got Moltke set up down here. Let's see, where are the rest of my... yeah, Bülow's here, and then I have Ruprecht here. So I've got HQs all over the Eastern Front with the idea that I'm just going to be launching offensives, holding ground, pushing ground, taking Poland, helping the Austro-Hungarians out, and then running up through the homeland of Russia with the idea being I'm going to knock Russia out earlier than history and alleviate that part of the two-front war problem. Ideal setup? Maybe not. Not sure. It depends, too, on, maybe if Russia sets up a little bit differently, maybe less units here and more units along this line because they want to cover the whole line. That might incentivize you to do an east first setup because it's weaker here. I'd say I have a pretty strong northern setup for Russia in terms of units. So this might just be 2 forces smashing into each other with no real great gains. But your situation is going to be different every game, and this is just an example of again an east first setup. I'm going to hop back to my normal save for a second, and one second, there we go. So that's it for Germany. Again, relatively straightforward, but you have a lot of options. Again, you could split the difference, have a very equal setup of units across both fronts, but there's sayings about you can't, if you defend everywhere, you defend nowhere, or if you attack everywhere, you attack nowhere, something like that. You'll have to figure out what strategy you like and what you're going to work with. So assuming this is what we're going to go forward with the West first setup, the final thing I like to do is set up Serbia, because no matter what, Serbia is going to enter the war on the side of Russia, and or rather, Serbia is going to get declared war on, and Russia is going to come to their aid, and the whole thing. So I just set up Serbia right away anytime I'm going to play because there's no point in not doing it. They would set up last, though their setup has no bearing on German setup. There's nothing they can do otherwise in relation to the German setup. So it just makes sense when Germany's done, go ahead and set up Serbia because at the very start of the game, at the start of the first impulse, Austria-Hungary must declare war on Serbia. And I've set up the units here. Now, there is one Serbian counter that I did not set up, and that is the militia unit for Belgrade. It is designated as a reserve unit, which means it isn't called in until I think the second impulse, I want to say. It depends on the reserve role, which I don't have in front of me at the moment. So I don't think you set that up to start with. And I've set up an okay line. These guys are defended by the river. These guys are defending the mountain. I've got the headquarters Alexander with a full complement of units here in the center and a few units defending in this mountain range. I could alternatively do something like that, though I don't think, just due to supply, that I need to do that. I don't think they're going to come crawling through here. But you're going to ask, why am I abandoning Belgrade? Well, by all means, if you want to set up in Belgrade, go ahead and do so. I think it's probably valid strategy to do it. Whatever works. The reason why I don't, and I won't in most games that I'm going to play, is because if you look at the angles of attack, these guys can attack here and here, 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 here. No matter how Austria sets up over here, unless they completely leave Serbia alone, which they're probably not going to do, they're going to be able to attack into Belgrade very easily. Doesn't matter that there's a river crossing, they can come from the west, or potentially the east, though the river still cuts through here. Belgrade is not defendable. It just isn't. There's no defensive terrain besides the river, and the river's not going to save you against an Austrian offensive using offensive points with an HQ and everything else. You're not going to be able to hold on to it. Fortunately, Serbia has special rules in this game, whereas, any other minor country, if you take their capital, that's a pretty big deal, and it's going to mean maybe they become conquered or something. Serbia is not conquered until both Belgrade and I apologize, Skopje, I don't know, Skopje is taken as well. So as long as the Serbians don't lose Skopje, they remain in the fight. Now, losing Belgrade is going to cause a morale point loss for Russia every turn because of a minor capital occupied. But I think I'd rather have a power alive and kicking and fighting here than, with alive units, than losing the capital anyway and losing units that have to be rebuilt. I think it just makes more sense that way. And so these guys can hold on at least a few turns longer than otherwise. If we had set up all these guys in some configuration like this, there's a very good chance they would get demolished. And I just don't see the point in doing that. I want to keep my guys alive. Because Serbia, you're probably not going to see Serbia beat up the Austrians and then running rampant through Budapest. But the longer that they're alive and taking Austrian units away from other fronts, the better. At least until maybe Italy gets into the game. So that's how I would set that up. Okay. So I think if I just poke around real swiftly here, I think this is the basic setup. Now, before the beginning of the game, you can do a couple of things with setting up naval units. Trying to think where that is at in the rulebook. I'm taking a look here. Yeah, so part of the setup rules in 22.2 of the rulebook one of the last couple of paragraphs here. It says, after you have finished setting up, you can make naval moves out to sea with your naval units. Treat this as a naval action you conducted last turn, so the units must finish their move, then drop to a lower sea box action as if they had stayed at sea last turn. Neutral major powers can only make these moves with convoy points. Um, Furthermore, you can set up convoy points at sea anywhere in the world in order to fulfill that start trade agreements, which we already did. Um, yeah, it's kind of interesting. I guess with the setup of 1914. Yeah, okay. So I guess reading that, because all the powers are neutral major powers in 1914, all the ships are going to start in port at the very, very beginning of the game, no matter what. So I guess there's, if you were setting up the 1917 scenario, which is a little bit different and it has different setup charts, you could conceivably have naval units that start out of port at the beginning of the game. But for 1914, they don't. They're all in port, and it's going to be, you got to move them out with a naval move or combined action to get them out in the sea zones and protecting convoys and looking for fights and all that good stuff. Let's see, anything else? I guess that's it. Any other miscellaneous setup stuff? There are the entry pool chits, so make sure you've got those punched if you're playing with a physical copy, and they have a force pool as well. So the 1915 counters, 1916 counters, 1917 counters, partisans, even some of the minors have later year start dates, so make sure you set up however you're handling your force pools, you do that the right way. Let's see. I guess that's it. Yeah. About 32 minutes on this video so far, so not too long. Again, I guess I'll just reiterate, this setup is one that I have set up just kind of based on what I think or how I think the game's going to go. It's probably not perfect. I imagine there's going to be some cases where someone could look at this and say, well, really what you want to do is you want to swap these two counters because the odds, percentage chance with the river here, XYZ, maybe with some years of practice, I can give you that sort of insight. But part of the fun is figuring out how you want to play the game and doing it your way and figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And, if you knew all the answers, it'd probably be less fun, right? So, yeah. Now, the only thing I guess I should also point out, since I'm looking at it and I'm just reminded, and I'm sorry I'm rambling here, in the Vassal module, the Serbian units are nice and easy to tell the difference from Austrian units because in the Vassal module they have this nice blue border around the outside. The in-person physical counters don't have the blue band, and thus all of the Serbian counters are white with the blue text and blue box, which means, if you're trying to shuffle through your counters, it's very easy to mix up the Austrian and Hungarian with the Serbian, and I imagine it's even harder maybe if you're colorblind, though I'm not sure the impact of all of that on what you see. Just be careful and look for the SE for Serbia. That was one of the weird things and really shocked me when I first got the game and was setting up was that, the counters that for sure are going to be fighting one another at the very beginning of the game have the same counter color. That is one thing, if I could change in the game, if I could change one thing, that'd be the change I'd make is in the physical game, do something like the Vassal module did to differentiate the Serbian counters. Any other questions or thoughts you can leave in the comments below or on the Board Game Geek comment section where I'll get this posted as soon as I can get it uploaded. After this, I'm going to maybe try to do some videos related to battles, offensives, naval battles, that sort of thing. And I'm going to use this save file, which I've called demonstrations, is what I've named the file. to take this game as is and run with it. So I may actually try to play through a whole turn, the first 1914 turn, and just however long it takes. If it takes an hour, it takes an hour, or 2 hours, whatever. Just try to play through a whole turn from the outset of the game so that you can see how the game is played, and we actually can get some demonstrations for you guys. I know folks are looking to see how offensives work and how air units play into everything, and I want to make sure I show that. And at some point, we'll get our Battle of Jutland. That's one thing I definitely want to do. So we'll send this big massive stack against this big massive stack, and we'll see what happens. Probably not going to be good for the Germans, but such is life. Okay, well I think that's it. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch you next time.